Hello, everyone. My name is Marc Rand, and I am the managing partner at Community Capital Advisors. Today, you're going to watch a series of videos with Reggie Knox, the California FarmLink Executive Director. The first video describes how FarmLink supports farmers by providing debt and technical assistance, and how the organization emphasizes supporting farmers of color. Check out the other videos with Reggie for more information on food financing, supporting regional food systems, and how to address systematic racism within the farming community. Also, visit Community Capital Advisors US for more great interviews with impact investment leaders. Thanks. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. This is Marc Rand with Community Capital Advisors. I'm very excited today to be speaking to my friend and colleague, Reggie Knox, Executive Director with California FarmLink. Today, we're going to learn a little bit about California FarmLink, of course, but also what Reggie and his team see in terms of debt needs by farmers, what it looks like in terms of communities of color going into farming or accessing loans to become farmers or expand their farm, and also what does it look like during these awkward times of COVID. So super excited to have Reggie here today, and Reggie, welcome. You're part of a series that we're doing, reaching out to industry leaders and thought partners, and super excited to have you. So Reggie, if you could maybe just describe FarmLink in a nutshell, that would be great, just to give the viewers an idea of what you guys are up to.
Great, thanks, Marc. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this. Sure, well, FarmLink's a 501c3 nonprofit that's been around for about 20 years. And we've always been focused on helping smaller and mid-scale farmers to access land and capital. I think of our work in three buckets, actually. There's the land access, capital access, and then the educational programs, mostly around business development and financial management, and getting prepared for loans and land access. So in fact, in our strategic plan of about a year ago, we came up with 3 different program areas or initiatives on the educational side, and those are equity on conservation lands, wealth building, and farm succession and resilience. So those are just to sort of evoke your thoughts, but I won't go into detail on each one in this quick overview of FarmLink. But I want to say, yeah, go ahead.
You bring up an interesting question, because a lot of folks in philanthropy, in banking, and otherwise, there's this word of equity, right? Some people think it's stock. Some people think it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how are you using equity in this light?
Right. Well, we do have a strong racial equity focus at FarmLink, and this has always been something we've thought about in our work. And of course, now with this huge uprising and new public consciousness around racial equity, we are going deeper. And our loan program, for example, has always served primarily farmers of color. So historically, about 60% of our borrowers are Latino farmers and other farmers of color. In the recent bout of lending the relief loans that we've done, particularly since we were an SBA lender, we were able to do those Paycheck Protection Program loans. And we made about 120 of those loans, and 70 of those farmers were farmers of color. We had a partnership in the Central Valley that allowed us to make about more than 50 of those loans to Southeast Asian farmers. Are immigrants to the Central Valley from the Hmong.
And any African American farmers in the portfolio, or how does that look?
There are very few African American farmers, and that's something that we've, certainly been putting out feelers recently. We do have some good connections and have been in conversation with particularly some urban Black farmers, but there are not a lot of Black farmers in California or in our portfolio yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think now is a great opportunity for folks to learn a little bit about FarmLink. So anyway, so a couple questions for you. How does it work, and what are you like? What do farmers actually need in terms of debt? So is it like, you know, money for seeds, or I'm making this up, like for a tractor, or what does it look like in your portfolio?
Yeah, well, the primary need that really got us on this track of wanting to become a CDFI, a community development financial institution, and wanting to do our own direct lending. In the earlier days, we did a lot of education around what are the loans you can get from the government, the Farm Service Agency, subsidized loans, and where do community banks and credit unions and the farm credit system fit into the picture. But these smaller and mid-scale farmers really were having a hard time accessing capital because there's a dearth of those smaller loans available. So the primary need that we identified was these annual operating loans, because farms typically, even the kind of farmers we serve, say 5 to 20 acres, mixed vegetables, strawberries here in the Central Coast are a common crop, along with those mixed vegetables in the valley, almonds and walnuts and tree crops. But people need operating capital, especially for the annual crops up front. Mm-hmm. They're not going to see, for something like strawberries, you're going to plant those in October. There's a lot of costs associated with preparing the ground and planting, and you're not going to see those strawberries coming on until at the earliest, say, typically March. And then you're not going to get into the thick of it until the summer. So you need operating capital up front. So we're talking about operating loans of under $50,000, but also equipment and infrastructure. And then eventually we got into land loans as well, and I can talk about that.
Let's take the strawberry loan for a second, and I want to go back to the land loan too. The strawberry loan is interesting, or the crop loan. So as a lender, that's kind of scary, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. Your payoff isn't really happening until you're really in the thick of things. So, can you unpack that a little bit? How do you do that underwriting, and how do you ensure that you're getting paid back while you're offering credit that, makes sense for a farmer?
Absolutely. Well, the type of lending that we do is pretty hands-on. So these are direct relationships that we have with these farmers. We rely a lot on the information about their track record as a farmer. What are the markets they've been selling to? We often also have a relationship with the, say, small distributors that these farmers are selling to. Or retailers, like we have a partnership specifically with Briar Patch Food Co-op up here in Nevada City, who vouches for farmers who have been selling to them for a long time, and they even went as far as to put up loan loss reserve risk money. So we have a lot of ways to mitigate risk by loan guarantees or sharing risk with distributors or retailers like Briar Patch, or other investors and supporters who are either putting up loan loss reserve money. We're always trying to increase the equity in our loan pool, but it's really the direct relationships with the farmers, their track records.
That character loan, but also looking at previous history. Yeah, and let's go back to the idea of land acquisition. Obviously, we're both in California, so land is always, and real estate is always of interest to everyone. So how does it work? So what does a typical land acquisition look like if I'm a farmer?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because that goes back to our land access program that we've had since the beginning, where mostly historically we've worked on leases with farmers. So, by and large, our clients are leasing land. They're not able to purchase land.
Yeah.
But we want them to be able to engage with the landowners in a solid lease agreement that they can bank on, right?
Yeah.
Land security, and if we're going to be making them a production loan, then that lease term needs to be at least as long as the loan is for.
And your organization will provide that technical assistance then, not to like feed you an answer, but it sounds like you guys provide a lot of TA and hand holding to the farmer as it relates to these leases and to make sure best practices are happening.
Yeah, so one of the initial ideas was that we have this website that links landowners with farmers, so that if you have an extra 10 or 20 acres to lease on your property, you can do that through FarmLink's website. And then eventually we started getting more in depth with our work around leases. We worked for over the last 10, 12 years with the Stanford Legal Clinic to really deepen the number and type of lease clauses that we have. So we started, for example, working in first rights of refusal and options to purchase. And so we think about our lease work as developing pathways to ownership for farmers. And then when our loan program, we became certified as a CDFI in 2013, and then made our first land loan in 2015. And now we've made about 30 land loans. And
Fantastic.
The operating loans are typically under 50,000, but the land loans are in the $500,000 to $600,000 range on average, and we're going up to $1 million now. But helping farmers develop the pathway to that potential for ownership, an affordable loan. Sometimes we work in partnership with land trusts who are able to purchase an easement, a conservation easement on that land, and all of a sudden you can, reduce the cost of acquisition of that land for a farmer once the easement's been placed on it by 40 or 50%.
So a land trust would then provide that funding to say, we're going to keep this land in perpetuity as farmland. So like whether it's a host or a malt or a whomever, they would provide that type of funding, and you guys would come in and provide the land loan. And that's really where the transfer of wealth happens, isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, the ability. Well, that's where we can go back to the word equity, right? So we're talking about how can we make it possible for these farmers who are often farmers of color, who are often undocumented farmers. We recently looked back at our numbers, and 23% of our borrowers historically have been undocumented farmers. So people typically, people know that farm workers are undocumented. They don't know that farmers are also undocumented. And these are the future of our agricultural system, the Latino farmers in California. So
they keep us all fed, all across the country, all across the world.
Right. So, how can we allow these farmers of color to also gain control of the assets and the ability to, to build equity, to build wealth through the appreciation of land or other assets on the land?
And family wealth too, that can transfer from generation to generation. I think that's super important. That's great. Yeah. Well, we're talking about different segments of the market, whether it's leased land or owned land. How else do you describe the farm sector in terms of like large and small, and what does that look like? And what is a small farm versus something like in Idaho where they're growing potatoes for McDonald's? What does that look like in California in your portfolio? How do you segment it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we are the largest agricultural state with 70,000 farmers approximately in California now. And by far, the majority of these farms are what I would call small and mid-scale farms, right? So, of course, the largest producers, we're still seeing concentration in agriculture. So at the top end, you have large farms getting larger, and they are producing much of the food, but then you have everybody else, who is more what we think of as family scale or small to mid scale agriculture. So those are the farmers that we serve. Typically these larger operations obviously have completely different sources of capital. They don't need our
Yeah.
services, and we want to serve the underserved and
Sure.
those who have been discriminated against, historically.
Yeah, let's be honest about it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And when you think about farmers of color, um, what are the particular challenges that or discrimination that you typically see or that they typically face? And you talked about whether they're undocumented or documented, but what are you typically seeing? And furthermore, how should lenders and foundations and otherwise think about bringing that to the conversation and being aware that folks are being discriminated against in this particular community? How does that look, and how do you handle that?
Sure. Well, there's a growing awareness about the incredible discrimination against Black farmers
Yeah.
and the lawsuits that resulted against the USDA, the class action lawsuits, and there's been a lot of focus on the South, many states where that discrimination was rampant and continuing into modern days. I think with our portfolio of mainly Latino farmers, the kinds of things that we see are, well, I spoke about the fact that a number of those farmers are undocumented. That means they're going to be much less likely to take advantage of any of the government programs, or much less able to take advantage of government programs through the USDA. And they are, the language barrier is huge in terms of access to resources. Also, historically here in the Central Coast, many of the small Spanish-speaking strawberry growers have been discriminated against in contracts that they have with shippers and distributors. That's been well documented. And even in the lease contracts that they sign in English, right, for
Right.
land sales or lease contracts. So, not to mention just the fact that lenders, most commercial financial institutions, are not interested in small loans. Those loans just aren't profitable, and that's why there are CDFIs like California FarmLink to be able to make those kinds of small loans and to create partnerships with impact investors and with philanthropy to be able to do this education and this hands-on kind of lending.
Well, it seems like, thank you, that's a great answer. It seems like food is definitely much more in the news. It's interesting how kind of things become fashionable and not fashionable, and whether it was insurance or I'm sorry, affordable housing or health insurance or whatever, and now we're in COVID time, right? And food is certainly an interesting topic right now. Restaurants are closed for the most part in California, maybe open for takeout, but I think there's more of an emphasis on food and people kind of raising an eye. It's also interesting to think about, with this idea of equity, who's really out there, making food for us, and being thankful for that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. We are seeing the cracks in the industrial food system, and that's something that's been pointed out in the media a lot recently. So we're seeing the giant pork producers, killing hundreds of thousands of hogs, or giant milk producers pouring their milk into lagoons because this industrial food system that we have can't shift fast enough. There's been a dramatic shift in the way people get their food. They're no longer getting it from restaurants in most states, right? There's a lot of food service, for example, here in the Silicon Valley, all those office buildings where people are no longer going to work. Many of our farmers had accounts either with small distributors who were selling to those food service organizations or to schools that are closed. So small farmers and our clients have been scrambling in many cases to shift their marketing, but it's doable. They are diversified. They are resilient. Yeah. They can, maybe their strategy was, well, 20% went direct to restaurants, 50% went direct to wholesale and went to wholesale and direct to retail. And then they had another portion that was in a CSA, right, or online sales. Yeah. So the farmers that had CSA or online sales can't keep up with demand because everybody's interested in that right now. Farmers markets are varied. Some of them have stayed open. We've advocated to keep them open as essential, food access. But the way that people are handling farmers markets is different. Some farmers are now bringing boxes. So a lot of the farmers that we serve are having to rapidly pivot to shift their marketing techniques. And that means that's why we put out all of those PPP loans. We also started our own emergency 0% loans with $1 million of the impact investment that we already had in our funds. Right. Those are some of the things we're doing to help the farmers out during the crisis.
Yeah, and there's the farmers, and then there's also the farm workers too. And I'd love for you to maybe expand as to what you're seeing with farm workers. And it really became clear. I saw an interview a couple months ago on City Arts and Lectures with an interview between Alice Waters and Dolores Huerta, which for anyone that has never seen her speak, it was just incredible. I forget, maybe in her 80s, and just was sharp as a tack, just saying, here's the policies, here's the advocacy, here's what we want to do, but really raising that issue about farm worker rights. So I just wanted to see if you could kind of touch upon farm workers as well, especially during COVID-19, what you guys are seeing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, what hypocrisy, right? That we do not provide a pathway to legal immigration for, some say, 80% of farm workers who are undocumented.
And for people who are feeding us.
Yes. And yet now during COVID, we say, but you are essential workers and you must go to work, even if you're in very dangerous situation in a meat packing plant or something. Again, the cracks in the industrial food system, right? This is not the food system we want to see. And this is what FarmLink's been trying to promote, and our partner organizations, that have a vision of a different food system where regional food economies can thrive. This is what we're trying to promote. So yeah, it's been challenging for the small and mid-scale farmers as well to adjust to social distancing among workers in the field, and protective equipment is critical, and masks, and we've seen the shortages, and that extends into the farm worker community. But of course, it's going to be easier for smaller scale farms to adapt. Not that it's not costly, and they're feeling the impact of it, but they're more nimble than a giant food processing industry.
Yet another reason to support local farmers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so that leads me into kind of a question around the future of farming and what that looks like, maybe 6 months down the road. What do you see in terms of farming and maybe a post-COVID situation? What does that look like for you guys, do you think?
Well, I think, what we're all hoping is that that some of the interest that consumers have had and support that consumers are putting out now for these smaller scale and farmers, and lights going off about regional food systems and how important for food security these regional food systems are. We hope that that interest will continue, long past the pandemic, and that this will be an opportunity to foster change in the food
Yeah.
system we've been working on for a long time.
And where would you point folks beyond just FarmLink? If I'm a consumer, where should I educate myself as it relates to where my food comes from and how to be supportive? And I care. So now what? I shop at Whole Foods. Doesn't that count?
Right, right. Well, yeah, let me just mention some great organizations that,
Yeah,
people
great.
might want to check out their websites.
Yeah.
In California, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, Kitchen Table Advisors,
Mhm.
um,
My dear
the
friend Anthony.
yes, all of these groups are doing important work in food systems change, and we are trying to, collaborate and partner in ways so that nobody's reinventing the wheel, but that we're all supporting each other's efforts. Another one is the Agriculture and Land-Based Training Association in Salinas.
Mhm.
It provides education to help people, mostly people who were farm workers and want to become their own farmers, and
Yeah.
so many entrepreneurial farm workers out there, that's a really valuable service. And then once all those given them that training, then we're helping them find land, or get a lease, and maybe build a pathway to land ownership, or have their first $10,000 operating loan. So ALBA, Agricultural Land-Based Training Association, is a farm incubator
Great.
program. Um, of course, the CCOF, the California Certified Organic Farmers,
Yeah.
are helping by developing that premium marketplace for organic, and those are a handful of great.
That's great. Great, great. And for the average consumer, someone like me, if you're not in the biz like you are, where do you think, where would you point me if I want to learn about where my food comes from? Would it be one of these organizations that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think those all have a piece of the story that I would encourage people to explore. And
Yeah.
um, the civil eats is, for the average consumer, might be a source of media that they don't know about yet, but it would be one I encourage people to explore. Civil Eats is really chronicling everything that's going on right now in the food system with their awesome journalism.
Cool. That's great. So kind of again looking forward and trying to be optimistic here, would love to hear your thoughts about the role of philanthropy as it relates to FarmLink and the food sector. Again, I think philanthropy, some foundations, some individuals have been in the food space for a while. Again, I think that there's now a renewed interest, as I've seen, in agriculture as we relate to COVID, et cetera. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, like, where can philanthropy be supportive, and and how can they support you to be innovative? Is there innovation, or is it just doing, not just, but just doing more of great things? So what do you see the role of philanthropy?
Great. Yeah, we're definitely, along with this heightened consumer interest about their local food system and where their food comes from, um, and buying direct from farmers. We're also seeing, more interest in the philanthropic community in supporting these local food economies, and that's really exciting. Um, I think some of the most innovative things that we're working on right now are where we're engaging um, philanthropy both on the impact investment side and on the grant and philanthropic side. So, there's a growing number, and I've seen really significant increase over the last 5 years in what, your work, Mark, foundations and community foundations who are trying to take some of their capital and put it in direct impact investments. So CDFIs are, as you know, the low-hanging fruit. We're certified by the Department of Treasury. We have our financials in order, and we can put that money out on the street. We're growing quite rapidly. So in many cases, the investments in our loan fund that are typically in the 7 to 10 year range are accompanied by modest grants to subsidize our lending program and, of course, pay for our educational activities with farmers. So I think that, sometimes we're engaging with impact investors on even other kinds of credit enhancements, guarantees, or secondary markets. So there's many different ways that we can all learn together, with the impact investors, those who are providing capital for our efforts, about being creative in the use of capital.
Yeah, so just kind of diving into that, just to be clear. So an impact investor, a family office or a foundation, otherwise private foundation, community foundation, can provide FarmLink a PRI or a low interest loan for 1% or 2%, whatever it is, for 5 years, 10 years, however long. Then you take those funds, and then that's your loan capital. You take that loan capital and lend it to the farmer to buy their land. Obviously, that net interest margin, the difference between what you're receiving the loan investment for and what you're, making loans for, that's the net interest margin. That's insufficient for the most part to pay all the operational costs for FarmLink and to do all the trainings, et cetera. So a grant is helpful as well.
That's right. Well, and it's that earned income, the net interest margin that you spoke of, that helps to create sustainability for our organization. We have an earned income strategy with the modest interest and fees that we charge on the loans. The bottom line for that lending is not the bottom line, it's the impact that we're having, right? Yeah. And yes, it does require additional capital to hire the staff, to do the underwriting and get those loans out and do the education and technical assistance.
So just two quick questions. One, what's your track record? Just to give all those investors, a sigh of relief. And two, leave us with an uplifting story of one of your borrowers. I'd love to hear a story.
Okay, great. We have a default rate of less than 1.2% historically. So, the education and these direct relationships have really paid off, and we feel really good about the lending that we do, and the borrowers feel good about it, and they want to repay their loans.
Yeah. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And a story, I think I can think of one Latino farmer that we started with probably 7 or 8 years ago. The first loan must have been, 10,000, and then this is a pretty common story. There's more than one that followed this general pattern. Maybe the next season it's 25,000, and then they've got a little bit of a track record with FarmLink. We've got a relationship established, and now they're gonna go from that initial 5 acres and lease another 10 or 20. In the case of this one farmer that I'm thinking of, Javier, he was able to, within a period of about 6 or 7 years, purchase his own farm. The Elkhorn Slough Foundation was involved in an easement on that piece of property that made it more affordable. The property has valuable conservation lands within it. So I think it's 130 acres or so, but only 60 acres or so that are arable. And he is now mentoring. He has some small leases to other small farmers who he's mentoring and providing opportunity to. And his business has grown into a quite successful venture.
Yeah, and changed his family's trajectory for generations to come. And
Yeah,
that land will be preserved for food forever, I assume.
right.
Just curious, do you have any sense of how many people are employed on that land?
Uh, I would, I would say probably 15 or 20.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
And,
Well, that
and
gives me hope.
the
That gives
other
me hope.
folks who are leasing from him also
Yeah.
are not included in the, his number of employees, and
So even larger. Yeah.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Well, Reggie, as always, it was great to speak with you today. Thank you for what FarmLink does, and you and your team are inspirational to all of us, especially during this COVID time. We appreciate what you all do. I thank you for also putting the spotlight on some of the different organizations that you mentioned. And for more information, go on to your website, farmlink.org, is it? Great.
CAfarmworker.org.
cafarmlink.org. All right.
But
Thank you,
thanks
my
for the
friend.
opportunity.
All right. Be well.
All right, you too, Mark.
Elbow bump. Boom. All right.